For years, a baby has been trying to murder his mother, and the show treats it like a running gag. But if you actually line up every attempt, in order, from the very first to the very last, something incredible happens. You don't just see a list of jokes, you see a story, a complete arc, with a beginning, a middle, and an ending, hiding inside one of the silliest premises in television. Today we're laying out the complete timeline of Stewie's plans to kill Lois, and by the end you'll realize the show was telling a real story the whole time, one almost nobody noticed. Because this timeline isn't random, the attempts change over the years, and the way they change tells you everything about who Stewie is and who he's becoming. Early Stewie kills differently than later Stewie. The early plans and the late plans are almost different characters, and the gap between them is the entire secret arc of the show's most famous obsession.
We're going to walk through this in 3 eras. The early era, where the plans are pure and theatrical, the middle era, where they get complicated and personal, and the final era, where they fade, and where the real meaning finally clicks into place. Watch how the attempts evolve, because the evolution is the whole point. Let's begin at the beginning, the early era. This is classic Stewie, the version most people picture. In these earliest plans, Stewie is a pure cartoon supervillain. The attempts are elaborate, theatrical, and gloriously over the top. Death rays, elaborate traps, schemes with the complexity of a heist movie, all aimed at one tiny goal, removing the woman who controls his life. The early Stewie treats matricide like a hobby, an intellectual exercise, a way to flex his genius against the universe's most annoying obstacle.
And here's the defining feature of the early era. The plans almost never feel personal. Lois, in this stage, is barely even a person to Stewie. She's a target, an obstacle, a symbol of the authority he resents. The attempts have the cold, abstract quality of a chess problem. He's not angry at Lois the mother. He's annoyed at Lois the warden. That's the first signpost, and it matters enormously because the personal element, the thing that's missing here at the start, is exactly what shows up later and changes everything. The early era is also the funniest, precisely because it's the most detached. It's easy to laugh at a villain plotting against a faceless obstacle. There's no emotional weight, no real stakes, just a brilliant baby and his cartoonish schemes. This is the Stewie that launched 1,000 quotes, the confident, theatrical, almost gleeful little monster. Enjoy him because he doesn't last. The show has plans for this character that go far deeper than the early jokes suggest. Now we enter the middle era, where things get complicated and where the timeline starts to reveal its hidden depth. Somewhere along the way, the plans start to change. They become less about elaborate schemes and more about the relationship itself. The attempts get tangled up in moments of actual connection, where Stewie is about to go through with something and then hesitates, or where a genuine emotional beat with Lois interrupts the plot. The middle era is defined by contradiction. Stewie still talks about killing Lois, but the show keeps slipping in moments that suggest he doesn't actually want to, that some part of him is bonding with her even as he plots against her. This is where the timeline stops being a list of gags and starts being a character study. The middle era attempts are messier, more human, more conflicted. You start to see the war inside Stewie, the genius who wants to be free of his mother fighting the baby who needs her. The plans become less efficient, more emotional, more likely to fall apart, not because they failed technically, but because Stewie's heart isn't fully in them anymore. The cold chess player from the early era is developing something he didn't have before: feelings, and feelings make terrible fuel for murder.
Here's the plan for the ending.
Pay attention to the trend line across these eras. The attempts aren't just getting more emotional. They're getting less frequent and less serious. Something is winding down. The obsession that defined the character is slowly burning out, and the reason why is the entire payoff of this timeline. Hold that thread. Before we reach the final era, let's slow down and look at the specific kinds of attempts, because the methods themselves tell the story even more clearly than the dates do.
In the earliest attempts, Stewie favors the device, the gadget, the contraption. He builds something, aims it at Lois, and expects physics to do the rest. These plans are pure engineering, emotionally weightless, the work of a mind treating murder as a science fair project. There's no hatred in the execution, just intellectual interest. He wants to see if it'll work as much as he wants Lois gone. That's a crucial detail, because it means the early plans were never really about Lois at all. They were about Stewie proving his own brilliance, and Lois just happened to be the most convenient target standing in his house. As the timeline progresses, the methods shift from devices to schemes. Instead of a gadget, Stewie starts engineering situations, manipulating circumstances, trying to arrange Lois's downfall through cleverness rather than firepower. This is a subtle but important evolution, because schemes require him to understand Lois as a person, to predict her behavior, to think about who she is. The moment Stewie has to actually understand his mother to defeat her is the moment the relationship becomes real to him. And a relationship, even a hostile one, is the beginning of attachment. You can't truly plot against someone without getting to know them, and getting to know Lois is what slowly, accidentally, humanizes her in Stewie's eyes. Then come the abandoned attempts, the plans Stewie starts and doesn't finish. These are the heart of the middle era and the clearest sign of the change happening inside him. He'll set everything up, have Lois exactly where he wants her, and then something stops him. A moment of connection, a flash of something he can't name, a realization that he doesn't actually want the outcome he spent so long engineering. The abandoned attempts are where you can literally watch the obsession losing its grip, where the machinery of murder keeps running out of fuel because Stewie's heart keeps refusing to supply it. And finally, woven throughout, there are the protective moments, the times Stewie actively saves Lois from danger that comes from elsewhere. These are the timeline's biggest contradiction and its biggest clue. A character genuinely committed to killing his mother would let an outside threat do the job for him. Stewie does the opposite. He intervenes, he protects, which proves that the wanting her dead was never the real desire underneath. The real desire was something far more complicated, and the protective moments are the truth leaking through the cracks of the joke. Let's enter the final era, where the plans fade almost completely, and where the meaning of the whole arc finally becomes clear. In the later years of the show, Stewie's plans to kill Lois become rare. The catchphrase shows up less. The death rays gather dust. The obsession that once defined him quietly recedes into the background, mentioned occasionally as a callback rather than a driving force. To a casual viewer, this just looks like the writers moving on from an old joke. But if you followed the timeline, you know it's something much more meaningful. The plans faded because Stewie changed. And this is the payoff to everything we've tracked. Remember how the early plans were impersonal and the middle plans got emotional? The final era is what happens after that emotional war resolves. Stewie's matricidal obsession faded because he grew, because he formed real bonds, above all his deep friendship with Brian, and because the lonely, unseen need that fueled the obsession in the first place finally started to get met elsewhere. The plans to kill Lois were never really about Lois. They were the symptom of a kid who felt unseen and powerless. And as Stewie found connection and identity, the symptom simply went away. The cure for his murderous obsession turned out to be friendship. When you line it all up, the complete timeline isn't a list of murder attempts, it's a coming-of-age story. A genius baby starts out treating his mother as an obstacle, slowly develops the capacity for real feeling, wrestles with the contradiction between needing her and resenting her, and finally outgrows the rage entirely as he learns to connect with the world. The murder plots were the awkward, violent growing pains of a character learning how to be a person. The timeline of Stewie's plans to kill Lois is secretly the timeline of Stewie learning not to. There's one more way to read this timeline, and it might be the most poignant of all. What if the plans to kill Lois were never about ending her life, but about getting her attention? Look at the pattern again with that lens. Early on, Stewie is a baby nobody understands, a genius trapped among people who hear his sophisticated speech as goo goo gaga. The one thing guaranteed to make Lois actually focus on him, actually engage with him as a force to be reckoned with, would be a threat. So the plans become a twisted bid for recognition. Stewie can't get his mother to see his brilliance, so he settles for getting her to see his danger. Even negative attention is attention, and a genius starved of acknowledgement will take whatever he can get. That reading explains why the attempts fade exactly as Stewie finds other sources of recognition. Once he has Brian, someone who talks to him as an equal, who takes his intelligence seriously, who actually sees him, the desperate need to force Lois's attention evaporates. He doesn't need to threaten her to feel real anymore because someone else is finally treating him as real. The timeline of the murder plots is, read this way, the timeline of a lonely child's search for someone, anyone, who would truly look at him. And the happy ending isn't that he stops being evil, it's that he stops being alone. When you hold all these readings together, the coming-of-age story, the search for attention, the slow humanizing of Lois through the very act of plotting against her, you get a character arc richer than most dramas manage with fully serious storytelling. And Family Guy did it inside a gag about a baby with a ray gun, which is either the laziest or the most quietly brilliant thing the show ever pulled off, depending on how closely you were watching. So here's the bigger idea this teaches you about long-running shows and the characters we think we know. The jokes we treat as random running gags are sometimes telling a complete hidden story right under our noses. We laughed at each attempt in isolation, never noticing that, lined up in order, they traced an entire emotional journey. Family Guy buried a genuine arc inside a gag, and you could only see it by stepping back and looking at the whole timeline at once, which almost nobody ever does. And here's the detail that makes the whole timeline land emotionally. The thing that turns a gag into something genuinely moving once you notice it. Lois never knew. Through every era, every plan, every device and scheme and abandoned attempt, Lois remained completely oblivious that her baby spent years plotting her demise. To her, Stewie was always just her sweet little boy, and she loved him with the same uncomplicated warmth the entire time. She never saw the death rays as anything but poise. She never heard the threats as anything but babble. And that obliviousness, which started as a joke, becomes the emotional anchor of the whole arc, because it means Stewie's journey from wanting her dead to quietly protecting her happened entirely inside him, invisible to the one person it was all about. Sit with that for a second. A child wages a years-long secret war against his mother, slowly loses that war to his own growing love for her, and finally lays down his weapons. And she never even knew there was a war. She just kept loving him through all of it. Exactly the same, never suspecting, never withdrawing. In a strange way, it's Lois's steady, clueless, unconditional love that wins. She never fought back because she never knew there was a fight. And her constant warmth was, in the end, the very thing that disarmed him. The timeline of Stewie's plans to kill Lois is secretly a love story told entirely from one side. And the saddest, sweetest part is that the other side never even noticed it was happening. Next time you watch an old episode and Stewie threatens Lois, place it on the timeline in your head. Is this early, cold, theatrical Stewie? Middle, conflicted Stewie? Or one of the rare late callbacks to a version of himself he's already outgrown? Once you can date the attempt, each one stops being a random joke and becomes a chapter in the best story the show never told you it was telling. So where on this timeline is your favorite Stewie moment? And do you think the obsession really faded because he grew, or because the writers just got bored of the bit? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know your read. If this made you see Stewie's whole arc in a new light, smash that like button and share it with the friend who only remembers the catchphrase. And stick around, because we've spent a lot of time on attempted murder. Next, let's talk about actual death and the surprisingly high number of times Peter Griffin himself has actually died.